Hello, everybody. Hope you are having a fantastic day. Today, I'm joined by Paul Verdu. Paul has worked for some of the largest brands in the land and then became a partner and took the role of leading Wisconsin Brewing Company in 2022. Now, in preparation for CVP Connects Milwaukee this June 19th to 21st, we couldn't be more excited to welcome current Wisconsin resident Paul Verdu. Now, Paul, I'm really excited to kind of dive into your career today, talk some strategy. But let's start. How's your day going, Paul?
My day's going well. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad you're all coming to, or you're coming, and others are coming to Wisconsin for your meeting. It's one of the beer capitals of the world, so we're happy to see you come to our state.
What do you love most about Wisconsin?
uh, the months between May and October. No, I love. It's just a really cool state. There's lots to do, right? So you have Milwaukee, which is a nice size city, has everything one would want, great restaurants, all the sports teams. It depends on what you want. It's got the arts and the culture. And then we're just got tons of lakes and outdoor activities in the state. And the beer is not bad. The people are great. I guess the only downside is we're like one of the most important swing states. So we get inundated with every political ad you can ever imagine. So during election, and we host conventions and stuff. So Wisconsin is somehow the center of the universe when it comes to politics. But when that's not happening, it's there's just a lot of great stuff going on.
So, for all of us coming up to Milwaukee in just a few weeks, is there anything that you recommend that we just absolutely have to do?
Just hit all the if you're especially if you're heading to Milwaukee. Just there's all kinds of like vibrant, really cool neighborhoods with tons of restaurants and craft breweries, and there's like a museum scene downtown. I think you're all coming just before Summerfest. That would have been awesome. The Brewers games, if they're in town, they're only 10 minutes away. So I would just soak in downtown. It's quite a cool place. A lot of different vibes going on down there.
I know our workshop's going to actually be at the best place, which is the old historic Pabst Brewery, and we're going to be
Yep.
staying at the Brew House Inn and Suite. So there's going to be a lot of beery
Oh,
things
that's good for you. Yeah, that should be fun. Yep.
where we
Well, you'll
can't
be
wait.
literally surrounded by beer culture.
That's what we live for, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I'd love to look at, what do you currently do in the world of beer, Paul? You're at Wisconsin Brewing Company. How did you end up there, and what's your role like?
Yeah. How did I end up here?
We'll dive deep into
After
the
a
story in a minute.
yeah, and we'll get into it, but after a long winding journey in through different companies and then many years in big beer companies, just over a year ago, decided to make the leap to become more entrepreneurial at my young age. Invested a little bit of money and all of my time and energy and efforts into Wisconsin Brewing Company with a few other folks that came in with me, and then took the helm last May. We are a small Wisconsin-based brewery, and when I say small, our own brand, which we'll get into that too later, which is Lake Louis Brewing. Um, we're Wisconsin based and we have that up and running and things are going well and we've got some rebranding going on and all that. But actually, about 80% of our business at Wisconsin Brewing Company is co-packing for other brands across many beverage segments, and that includes beer, of course, but also seltzers. We're still making some of those. A lot of non-alc stuff like energy drinks, and we also make some hard tea, and so you name it, we're making it, and that's actually been quite a success story, and it's helped us sort of diversify our business offering outside of just craft beer, which, as many people that would watch this would know, it's been a bit of a challenge, and so being able to flex our capability into other categories has really helped us remain vibrant and continue to grow. And we're really doing well on the contract side. So it's quite a unique business model. I think more people are turning to it because there's excess capacity. It's like, what do we do with it? We make stuff for other people. But we've started gotten into a rhythm where we're both managing our own brand, which is sort of where my bread and butter is located, and then become a fast growing contract manufacturer.
Are there any products in the contract space that are just very fascinating to you these days, or anything you believe is going to be the next wave of things we're going to start to hear a lot more about?
And that's a really good question. That's another reason why I'm pretty excited about this role, because I kind of sit back and you see who's coming, knocking on the door, asking if we can help. And there's still some beer clients, and we really value them. And in fact, one of our most exciting clients who we are allowed to talk about. Some of our stuff is under NDA, but they talk about us, so we talk about them. And we're the beer supplier for Troy Aikman's Beer 8 down in Texas, and that's gone pretty well for them. And so we're very, very proud of the fact that we make a killer light beer, and Troy Aikman and his entire team that run that business are excited, and so that's fun. But just sitting back, people are knocking on our doors for non-alc beer. Getting a lot of calls lately for CBD/THC products, trying to navigate the legalities of that. A lot of functional non-alcoholic sparkling waters, with all kinds of prebiotics, probiotics, things that are better for you. So a lot of growth in that space. Those can be quite complicated to make, actually. We're all used to making beer. Seltzers were relatively easy. When you start getting into some of these more new age kind of non-alcoholic, better for you beverages, you're talking about a blending operation that's got 10, 15, 20 ingredients, and it becomes quite tricky to manage. So just sitting back and seeing who's knocking on our door and what's growing, it's been quite interesting. And like I said, it's helped us not just rely on the growth or lack of growth in the craft industry to kind of flex in and out of other spaces.
Now, I know you worked for a lot of other brands during your career, and you mentioned that you invested in Wisconsin Brewing Company. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how scary was that for you to go from, working for other organizations to being the entrepreneur yourself?
So the last job I had before this decision was the president of 10th and Blake, which is the Molson Coors craft division. So I got to work with fabulous people in brands like Terrapin and Hot Valley. And at one point, obviously, St. Archer, we had to make a tough decision on that one. Atwater, Revolver, and so on. And so the biggest difference between doing that and what I'm doing now is I don't have an umbilical cord to a larger company that if there's a tough month or quarter, there can be some cash infusion and some other investment opportunities. And so I've taken the helm of a company where we're paying as we go. We're kind of doing it the old fashioned way, like building our business as we invest. So just getting into that rhythm has been quite a fun challenge. And knowing that I'm one of the shareholders, it's helped me, really hone in on making great decisions that will grow our business and grow our bottom line and help us create a very vibrant and healthy company. And so
has it changed?
I guess you can't take anything for granted, when you're running your own show.
Absolutely. Has it changed anything about the way you lead and manage?
That is another great question. I think perhaps take for granted the access to a huge roster of talent and a sort of a deep pocket approach to like building the greatest team. And so being really smart about who we hire. I think our team is amazing, but you have to be really selective and really find people who are not only good at what they do, but can add to the culture of the company. In a small place like we're working now, there's nowhere to hide. And so I've just had to become more in tune with all the nuances of running a smaller company, and all that goes with it in terms of the people side of things. And so that has been a fantastic journey, and one that I'm still growing into. And I feel very fortunate, however, to I think that what I've done to get to this point has helped me be really effective right out of the gate at coming to Wisconsin Brewing Company. Now, part of that was exposure to small breweries. I know that within a big company like Molson Coors, still running small businesses within that helped me make that transition.
No, because that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's been my career path. I've always been the guy running the other brands at a company versus the motherships. And that's developed a sharper sword and a different mindset. And that's helped me transition into the smaller space.
That's an interesting point there. I guess, being the person who ran the other brands, did you feel like you were part of the greater company, or even, working at those smaller, but you did? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And the way I used to say it is like, the beauty is we get to act entrepreneurial and small and move and be flexible, but we have the backing of like one. And in my career, it's like typically always one of the biggest beer companies in the world. So the resources, the access to people, to money, to marketing talent, to research and all those things. And so in those environments, it was the best of both worlds. Whereas now it's a little bit more scratching and clawing, but it's stuff that I'm used to. So yeah, I always felt part of the bigger company.
No, thanks for sharing that. Now, you've been
Yeah.
in beer for quite some time, but I imagine a career in beer wasn't what you envisioned probably growing up, or what you even ended up doing for quite some time. Like Paul, so go way,
No.
way back. What did you think you were going to do with your life? Did you have that dream job you wanted to pursue when you were a kid?
This Once I crossed off, athlete, then I thought maybe sports journalist or something, but I wasn't really that interested in spending 10 years in a small market writing about high school sports. So I always felt like sports would somehow factor in, to be honest. Um, then I ended up getting a finance degree, going into systems development and all that. And then I was like, that's not going to work for me. So 4 years after doing things that I wasn't passionate about, I went back and got my MBA from Texas and went into marketing. And then I was really thankful to land in places like Nestle and SC Johnson. And I think as a marketer, that's my core background, if you will. Companies like that really train you, teach you all the building blocks of building brands. And that's kind of been what I've taken with me from those places into beer. In 2005, having spent 5 years at SC Johnson, managing things like Glade and Raid and those brands that everyone knows but aren't that cool, to be honest, the beer business called. And at that point, I said, okay, here's a chance to take what I love to do at the time, brand marketing, building brands, understanding consumers and all that, but to do it in a category that's far more interesting to me and something I'm more passionate about, and that would be beer, which, by the way, directly and highly associated in the sports world. So I thought that could get me to that path, right? So I jumped at that opportunity. In 2005, I joined Miller Brewing Company. And so then I've been in beer ever since. And like you said, mostly in big companies
Yeah, so
until
looking
last
at
year.
your Glade and Raid days that you had, what did you learn from those years that you took to your future career?
Like I said, the fundamental building blocks of brands and what it takes to build a solid brand, understanding the marketplace, the competitive dynamics, the consumer space, and how you create brands that are differentiated, that are distinct, that are authentic, that are as simple as possible because consumers are busy. Like access to all kinds of training and smart people and all that stuff was really, really valuable. I think I have seen people come from that CPG world into beer and be less successful. And I think it's because I also understood that while I was, say, working on Glade, for example, it was all about innovation. Like this year we're adding a nightlight and next year we're adding another outlet. Like just, it seems random, but it's like you had to come up with news every year to stand out and be different. In the world of beer, and that's functional, right? All those things I just mentioned are functional innovation. In the world of beer, there is that, but the beauty is it's pure marketing in its purest form, right? It's marketing in its purest form. It's creating emotional connections with people. It is not, you're not going to take a Miller Lite and add something functional to it necessarily and get people on board. You have to spend your time on the more emotional side. And that's actually, as a marketer, a lot more fun, a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult to actually find success. But it's one thing I loved about the beer business. It's, boy, if you did a blind tasting on most beers, it's hard to tell them apart when they're in that same space, right? But what makes people choose Modelo Especial over something else? It's the brand. And so that part I really loved getting better at as I entered the beer world.
So looking at brands, whether brands you've worked on in your career or brands that you've just been really impressed by, what are some brands, I mean, they can even be in the beer space, that you believe have done a really good job of connecting with the consumer?
Oh, yeah, there's been a lot. I can just talk about brands I've worked on because um, I feel like I've spent time on brands, and my goal always as a brand person was to leave the business in a better spot than when I found it. So the brand that I think, and I've had a lot of them in my career. I actually taught a class with a guy named Mike Kallenberger. I don't know if you know who that is. He teaches at Vermont, and I did a session with him, and so it forced me to like make a list of all the brands I've worked on. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty fucking cool. Oh, sorry, pardon my
You're all good.
language. So The one that stands out amongst that crowd right now, just because of where it is in the world, is Modelo Especial. So in 2007 and a half, so like June of 2007, after a few years at Miller, I did get the opportunity to join what's now called Constellation Beer. And I became the vice president of marketing of everything except for the Corona family of brands at the time. And so that included Modelo Especial, Pacifico, Negro Modelo, at the time Qingdao and St. Pauli Girl. But Modelo Especial has always just resonated with their consumer. And in fact, when I took it over, it was 17 million cases. 4 years later, when I left, it was 35. And now, if you haven't been reading, because of some of the issues that Bud Light's had, Modelo Especial is actually the number one dollar share beer brand in the country now. So it's amazing. But that's not just because it's a great liquid. It's because they've understood their consumer. And 80% of it, when I was working on it, was Mexican consumers from Mexico. And whether they were first or second generation, it just was something that reminded them of home. And it stood for something, and that strength inside piece that Modelo's stuck with over the years. And so one thing that Constellation has always done well is find a brand positioning, stick with it, be consistent, be fresh with it. So don't just sit back and watch the brand get tired and old, but actually create that, what I call fresh consistency. So Modelo sort of followed that track, but the brand that set the path for that would have been Corona. Like Corona, if you think about it, the very first ad you've ever seen on Corona was probably two people on a beach, right? And now it's evolved. It's been fresh consistency, but it's now find your beach. And that happened as I was there in in 2010, 11, this notion of how are we going to evolve this campaign, keep it fresh, but keep it authentic and where it's been. And Corona, I think, set the standard for a beer brand that has maintained its authenticity and positioning over many, many decades. And I've worked on in and around brands that, geez, there's a new brand manager, so there's a new package and there's a new brand positioning, and that is a death spiral. I don't want to name names, but there's a lot of them out there. So like I said, authenticity, something that's distinct and relevant to people, so it means something. Fresh consistency, it doesn't have to be the same every year. You add freshness to it, but still, if you can draw a red thread line between all the years of its marketing, and then
And that's
something
the term
simple.
you came up with, fresh consistency?
Well, I don't know if I coined that, but it's something I've said for many, many years. If you don't say fresh consistency, I think you can lock someone into therefore we never evolve, and that's not the point. The point is there has to be a thread between where you've been and where you're headed, but there has to be also something that's engaging and contemporary and brings people in. And so I think of all the beer companies, Constellation probably has done it best, because you talk about going from Corona to Modelo as their mothership brands. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, in so many situations, unless you're innovating, you're going to fall behind. In so many of the brands that have been around a while, they think the brand name may carry them into the future, but at the end of the day, you have to be thinking about continual improvements, that fresh consistency to keep, staying relevant.
Yeah, and the innovation is not just on the beer side. It's how you bring it to market. It's about how you plan media, how you buy media, how you promote your message. The message itself can evolve and stay fresh, but still be consistent. But obviously, in the world of craft, a big part of it is the beer. So I'm a big believer in having of a craft brewery having some core brands, some core beers that they pump every day, and those are what the brand is known for. But if they're not innovating and finding the next thing, they're probably going to hit some tough times.
So we're going to dive into core brands and innovation in just a second, but you've shared, a really neat example about something you're proud of, the Modelo example. But is there anything in your career that really challenged you, or where you look back and oh, wow, I either learned a lot from that, or maybe it didn't go as planned?
Any person on earth who has touched Pilsner Urquell in the U.S. would probably say that one. Whoever's listening right now probably says, "Oh, one of my favorite beers in the world is Pilsner Urquell," especially if you have it in the Czech Republic.
It's delicious. I had it on New Year's Eve in Prague one time, and it was fantastic. In the square, when fireworks were just blowing up next to me, it was a vibe.
I've worked on that brand in South Africa. I've worked on that brand in Canada, and I've worked on that brand in the U.S. And it's the kind of brand where if you talk to people, it's their favorite beer. We could never get people to buy it though, enough people. So even cold supply chain, shipping it cold across the ocean. And everything we've tried, storytelling, the history, it invented beer, right? All those things that seem really important in brand building, it just never has taken off. It's probably the most appreciated, unappreciated brand ever.
Why do you think that's the case, Paul?
By the way, Mike Kellenberger is on this call. He has a whole book on this, I think. But I don't know. I think there has been historically quality problems with bringing it. Like, it's so good in Prague. It's also very, very temperamental. It's a very fragile beer. It's so delicate and beautiful that sticking it in containers, shipping it across the country. Boy, when we used to get it to South Africa, it used to sit in like a port off the coast of Durban when it's like 95 degrees and it sits there for a week before someone gets to it. It's not good for the beer. So I think there's been unless you're deeply in the know and are getting it as fresh as possible, I think there's just some old school baggage that exists with that brand in terms of the product quality. So I think that's the number one hang up. And then it's just there's so many offerings in the U.S. craft business that I think niche imports like that just have a hard time breaking through.
No, that all makes a lot of sense. So, looking at your years in big beer and now you're with Wisconsin Brewing Company and Lake Louis Brewing, what are some of the techniques that you've taken from some of the larger companies that you worked for that you were excited to bring to a brand like Wisconsin Brewing and Lake Louis?
Yeah. I say this all the time, but my wheelhouse is in marketing and sales, the commercial side, I would call it, right? And I've gotten more and more and more experience in general management, leading teams, growing businesses, and now day to day learning the operation side of a brewery has been fantastic. And I started doing that years ago too, but now I'm like all in. But what I was able to quickly take was this sort of strategic mindset when it comes to brand building, and that's one of the first things I noticed when I got to Wisconsin Brewing Company. Just a little history lesson for anyone who's interested. I'll go fast. Wisconsin Brewing Company is about 10 years old, and it's based outside of Madison, Wisconsin. In 2019, a friendly brand of ours, and this was before I got there, by the name of Lake Louis Brewing, started by a guy named Tom Porter, about 30 miles from where our Verona brewery is. He wanted to get out of the business after building it for 20 years. So Wisconsin Brewing Company acquired Lake Louis. And in so doing that, they took on like another distributor network. Some of it was the same, but a lot of it was different. So when I got there, the first thing I noticed was we are small when it comes to our own brand. We have two of them. They're both sold in the state of Wisconsin only. And in 25 counties in the state, we have different distributor networks. So the biggest thing I took over was just this notion of trying to simplify before we press go. And that came in the form of those things I just talked about. We quickly did some analysis, some talking, a lot of interviews, hired an agency to help me, an agency run by a guy named Kevin Riley, who's also a big beer vet, great guy, friend of mine, called 6 Feet out of Minnesota. And they helped us. First thing we said was we're going to pick one consumer brand, and that's it. The other one will transition into the new one. And Lake Louis has been around longer. It's got way better iconography, way better story behind it. Like, it's really got a lot of tools and things to work with as a brand person. So we quickly decided we're going to hone in on Lake Louis. And then we did a whole strategy review. We've created a brand positioning along those things I talked about. Authenticity, so we understood where the brand has been, and we're still rooted in those things. Distinct and relevant, so we tried to hone in on some talking points around. It's called Lake Louis, so we're about lakeside levity, and we're about having fun, jumping off the pier, dive right in, we call it, like into our brand, into the lake, whatever it is, but just have some fun. It's a fun state that we work in. It's a fun industry. I do try to always remind people that it is beer. Let's have some fun with this. And then so we created a whole new brand strategy, then a new visual brand identity, which has been getting rave reviews. Lake Louis historically had a actual fishing lure as its iconography. And our agency came up with this fantastic idea where it's now a glass full of beer that's shaped like a lure. So it's a beer lure. And we've got that on merch. We didn't sell much merch a year ago, and now we sell out of merch the minute we get it because this beer lure logo is quite fantastic. So just like honing in on a brand and simplifying. And so now everything lives under Lake Louis. So Wisconsin Brewing Company's biggest beer was Badger Club. It is now called Lake Louis Badger Club. And we took a lot of the visual elements of Badger Club and we just put it under a new roof called Lake Louis. So this transition is basically complete. So we had this ceremonial christening of our new Lake Louis brand focus a few weeks ago, where Lake Louis is actually a pond on the founder's property. We created a little mockumentary video about the most important lake relocation project in the history of Wisconsin. So we relocated Lake Louis from as a pond in Arena, Wisconsin, 35 miles using solo cups and 30 people. We did a relay. Took all day. We stopped at a bar for a party, of course. And then when we got to Verona, which has a lake on it, didn't have a name. Verona is our new home. It's the home of Wisconsin Brewing Company. We poured that water into our lake, and from then on, it's now called Lake Louis. So everything we do facing forward is Lake Louis. And so we had some fun with that. Wisconsin Brewing Company is still our parent company. We have two lines of business. Lake Louis Brewing, that's our consumer brand. And then their other piece of business is our larger and faster growing co-man business. So we didn't get rid of Wisconsin Brewing Company altogether. That's the name of our organization, but the brand that we focus on is Lake Louis. So, and then we consolidated our distributor network completely. We have one distributor network across the whole state. And there were some hard decisions in that, and no one wants to, sort of break up with the distributor who helped get started. But that's what we had to do. And so now simpler from the brand perspective, simpler from the distributor perspective, and hopefully we'll have a great couple of year run here, get this thing up and going.
It sounds like things are going well and nice and organized. So, when I was getting ready to chat with you today, I was diving into some articles that you had, talked in before, and you mentioned that no one had ever called a Badger Club, like a Wisconsin Brewing Company Badger Club. They were just referring to it perhaps as Badger Club. So when all the consumers who would frequent that beer, started to see it under the Lake Louis Brewing label, what was their perception like? What was going through their minds?
It's pretty fresh. I haven't heard much. And so I think the key there is that the imagery, the name, the beer itself, everything stayed the same. I like to say it just has a new roof over its head. You're right. I did say that a bar call was never, in fact, this is not a knock on anyone, but Wisconsin Brewing Company was never really built as a brand. The brands were one level below that as the beer name. So Badger Club being the biggest one. A beautiful amber lager, by the way. It's still our biggest brand. But that was the one we had to work on the hardest to transition into Lake Louis, to make sure that the visual iconography and what people remember, which part of that is this icon of a badger named Leroy. So Leroy is prominent on all of our packaging, point of sale, everything. So because it's the same name, the same beer, that same Leroy is incorporated, and no one was really calling it Wisconsin Brewing Company Badger Club, I think we're going to be fine.
It sounds like they can still feel the connection.
Yeah.
So, it sounds like you all have a lot of flagships like Badger Club. I think you mentioned that Lake Louis has an IPA that's pretty popular. Now, innovation's such a buzzword, such a thing that so many breweries are trying to do, find that next beer, find that next innovative alternative beverage. And it kind of leads you into like portfolio management. And, while I'm sure you could probably talk about it for hours, what are some easy to implement strategies that a brewery can use to like focus on their core brands, but also lean into those innovative projects they want to kind of really experiment with?
I think the key is, I think most craft breweries do a good job of always creating new and interesting beers. I think the key is like seeing what's happening out in the market and kind of go after that space, and then use your innovation pipeline, whether that's a one barrel little pilot that you have or whatever it is. You got to keep trying things, and then I think use your tap room to decide like, oh, this is the one that people are talking about most. So it's just like paying attention to two things: what's happening in the market, and then what's happening in your own space, and where do those converge. And that's probably where you need to push a little harder on that idea and to get it out there. One example for us has been, we're lucky as a contract manufacturer. We installed 19.2 ounce can capability a while back. And in fact, I like to take a little credit for the foresight that in 2017, I helped convert most of our 10th and Blake craft breweries out of bombers and into 19.2, against a lot of resistance, by the way, because it's like, whoa. Like, that's going to kill our business. And you can just see the writing on the wall. That's where it was headed. So we stuck to our guns, and just last week I saw Molson Coors post an article about how awesome the 19.2 category is for them, and so I like to think
Give
that
you
I
a
played a
shout out.
small part in that. So we can do that at Wisconsin Brewing Company. So knowing that for the last 3 years, the number one growth item in in craft has been 19.2s and C stores, like knowing that for sure because I've had the view to it from a big company. Knowing that we had that capability, and also knowing that the number one style in that 19.2 happens to be a 9% double IPA or an imperial IPA. You kind of create that Venn diagram, and we just launched a beer that fits our positioning. It's all of our beers are super approachable, and I'm a big fan of that. Like if you want a beer to sell a lot, like it should probably be something you could have a couple of. So we created a beer, an imperial IPA, clocks in at 9.1. It's super crushable though. It's tasty, but it is an imperial IPA. So it's true to form. We named it Dank Beast with a little wink and a nod. It's not that beastly, but it fits our positioning. It looks like a little monster coming out of the lake, right? So we positioned it well, and we created a really beautiful graphic around it. And then we threw it in a 19.2, and then we pitched it to Quick Trip, and it's on fire. So it's like, what are you capable of? What are you good at? And where's the market headed? And find that, like I said, Venn diagram, and try to pinpoint something that fits that area. And that's what, like, for example, what we've just done.
So I love a Venn diagram, and you've mentioned them twice in the past minute. So what are the circles in
It's
that
the
Venn
same Venn
diagram?
diagram. I went in one Venn diagram twice.
What are those circles in that Venn diagram we're talking about, Paul?
Like I'm talking 19.2-ounce can growth, like
Okay.
package. I'm talking imperial, like this bifurcation of craft beer. It's either you got to have something at 4% or you got to have something at 9. Stuff in the middle is floundering, and it's like all the same. So that piece of the puzzle, and then the last piece is like what we are capable of, right? So we can. This is the products. This is the kind of beer we can make well, and this is the package we can put it in. And those three things kind of, there's a little circle in the middle of that, and that's kind of us in a Dank Beast in a 19.2 sold in C stores.
I love it. That's a great explanation there, and a good Venn diagram. So let's dive a little bit deeper into innovation. You know, a brand brewery that they launched this new product that they're really, really excited about. How do you judge the success of these innovations and whether they're worth continuing in the future? You know, any tips or strategies that have worked for you over your
Oh man, this is a good one. Again, I've never burned a bridge in my life, and I'm not intending to do now. But one of the problems with larger companies, expectations are extremely high, and you try things, and if it doesn't fly in the first year, it's kind of done. Versus if you take, I don't know if what people thought of Voodoo Ranger when it first came out. I was scratching my head. Maybe a lot of people were, I don't know, but they gave it time, and they gave it attention, and they kept working it and nurturing it. I'm sure they saw some early signs of like success to keep after it. It doesn't mean that everywhere they put it, it blew the doors off. But I think that's an example of like patience, reading between the lines about what good looks like. And so it can't just be, we got 5,000 chain stores to take it. That's not a measure of success. It's actually very dangerous to start that way because then you all of a sudden aren't selling and you're done. You only get one chance. Versus this slow build from the bottom up. Keep going, keep pushing, keep building, believe in it, grow at a solid pace, but not too fast, and then start to hone in on like what's working about it and plus that up, and things that aren't working about it, get rid of them. And then like here you're sitting 3 years later with this thing called Voodoo Ranger that's like the biggest craft brand out there now, you know, in terms of growth and leading the charge on 19.2s, sort of reinvented the entire New Belgium business, and has been a huge part of their success. So I think patience is the key. And like even for us on Dank Beast, when I say we got it in Quick Trips in Wisconsin, that's a big deal, right? That's like, see, Quick Trips have their own. Another thing that everyone should do when they come to Wisconsin is go to Quick Trip. Amazing food. But we only have them in some Quick Trips. So next year, I hope we have them in a few more. And then in 3 years' time, maybe they're across all the Quick Trips in the state.
So as I'm driving up to Milwaukee on June 17th, it's late at night. I'm going to need to grab, is it Dank Beast?
Yeah.
I need a day.
Where are you coming? Where are you coming from?
I'm coming from Virginia, so it's a long drive.
So you're going through Chicago, basically.
I am.
Yeah, when you get closer to Milwaukee, you might find it. If you'd have to go a little bit further west into our core market over by Madison to really find those, but you will drive past several quick trips. So check
What's
them
the
out. In fact,
perfect pairing
in
of it?
Kenosha is home to the largest quick trip in the state. You'll see a
Cool.
sign.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'll make it on my roadmap. So
You'll
as I'm
see
getting at that
you'll
quick
see an
trip,
entire cooler door of 19.2s, by the way.
love it.
A lot of them are brands I've worked on. Terrapin is all over the place in Wisconsin. Hot Valley is all over the place in Wisconsin. Obviously, Leinenkugels, they haven't entered the 19.2 game, but you'll see a plethora of brands that are out there that I'm proud to say are a part of what I've done in the past. But I guess the point is you don't define success by because the doors were blown off. Define success by like it is selling where we put it, leverage that story to put it more places, and then it's a virtuous cycle. Versus when expectations are way too high. The definition of success is 100% based on the expectation, right? Like you could, at a large company, you could sell 25,000 barrels. It's a freaking gigantic failure. At a smaller company, like that would be a massive success. So it's just being really smart with what you're expecting and then building from there.
So for smaller brands, do you encourage them to try these more innovative projects just to see what sticks because they have a little bit more flexibility than larger brands?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard though, right? Because what sticks, I would just keep it tight though. Like what sticks in your hometown and then what sticks in the couple of counties surrounding you. And then like, you know what I mean? Build from there. Have a home base that you try stuff in. And then when that works, then you can kind of push out from there. But if you try to do it all at once, I think that's where you run into failure. And that same logic applies to every size brewery. It's just that their universes are different sizes. That's all.
I agree. You got to own your mild and work outward.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like Voodoo Ranger, and they've created a whole brand family along that. Do you think that's a strategy that can be successful for smaller craft brewers?
Oh boy, maybe not. It's hard because they're small, and so the thing they do as an offshoot will be even smaller for a while. If their brand is tired and it's got no legs and there's no future, then you can start thinking about how in the next 5 years we're going to transition out of that thing and into this thing. Maybe the reason they were able to do it is because they had this big cash cow mothership brand out there, like with Fat Tire and stuff. They had the resources and probably time and desire to make Voodoo Ranger big over a number of years, but it was off of a base of an already big business. So I think it's tricky to have an offshoot on a small brand, to be honest, and probably could do more harm than good, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And like if someone came to me and said, we want to we have this idea for a beer and it's not going to be Lake Louis though. It's going to be a sub brand of like, it's like, what? We haven't even gotten started. I felt that way. Like even, one of the brands at Contemplate that I oversaw was Peroni. And it actually got some decent success and lots of opportunities and very stylish brand. And I'd say every year or two, it was like, here's a sub variant of Peroni in Italy that we should launch. And my whole point was, but the main variety of Peroni hasn't really done what we want it to do yet. So let's focus on that. So it's easy to jettison like the mother brand for something as an offshoot, but it's very dangerous, I think, to the mother brand when you do that.
That's really good insight there. So now I'm going to completely mix it up when you do a conversation piece I think you'll enjoy talking about. So before I got into beer, I spent a lot of summers working at baseball stadiums all over the place. Now, Wisconsin Brewing Company, you all have the naming rights for the Lake. Is it Lake County Dockhounds?
Lake Country Dockhounds, yeah.
Country, typo on my part there.
No, it's fine. It's out here where I live, 30 miles west of where you will be in Milwaukee. It's called Lake Country. There's probably 20 lakes out here. It's kind of like going to a lake area of a northern state, but it's actually right outside of Milwaukee. So there's a new minor league baseball team started here last year, and they play at Wisconsin Brewing Company Park. And inside that park, we have a 5-barrel pilot brewery right in sight.
So I'm really intrigued that I love the concept. It's such a cool partnership, but I've got a couple questions for you. So how did you end up going with Wisconsin Brewing Company instead of Lake Louis Brewing on that one?
I agreed to come to Wisconsin Brewing Company in April of 2022. the first call I made was, is it too late to call this Lake Louis Park? And the answer was, well, the sign just got delivered and it's going up today. So as a small brewery that doesn't have a ton of money just laying around, we're sticking with Wisconsin Brewing Company Park right now. Our deal's up after another couple years, and even then, like with the way that we're growing and stuff, if I had my way, like next year, the year after, it would become Lake Louis Park. But the reality set in. That's like part of being at a small craft brewery like this, or being at a company of multiple sizes. You just got to make the best use of resources. That sign was literally built and put up, and that's what it's called. I tell people, well, that's still the company name. And so when we tell people, yeah, we are a contract brewer and we are the sponsor of a baseball team too, but inside the park, the brewery, just to make matters more confusing, it is called it's a Lake Louis pilot brewery. So part of this transition out of WBC and into Lake Louis, we're doing like live and in person at the ballpark. I do get questions like, are you part of the same company? Yes, we are. Lake Louis is our consumer brand. Wisconsin Brewing Company is the name of the organization. But it is allowing people to kind of make that transition themselves. They see this connection.
Well, thanks for rehashing that for a moment. Sorry to let you go through that.
It is a great question. I get
well,
asked a lot.
Looking at that stadium experience, what are your goals for the fans who interact with your brands?
Oh, it's actually the same conversation we just had about innovation and core. So at the ballpark, we're the primary beer provider across all segments of beer. There's still some domestic lights and stuff in there. Well, our distributor is the distributor of the Miller brands, and so there's stuff in there. So we play friendly. But the first objective is to expose as many people as possible to the Lake Louis portfolio. And to do that, it has to be our core beers. Because the core beers are the beers that they would drink at the ball game and then go buy in the stores. So we have to have our core lineup, and we do. We have a lot of handles of our core beers. But to be a cool craft brewery and to be one where people are like, oh, they're doing some neat stuff, we have this 5-barrel system and we're innovating. So a lot of our innovation at that 5-barrel can be for stuff outside the ballpark, but most of it is in conjunction with the team and in conjunction with, for example, this summer with their schedule. So opening day, we brewed a beer. Our flagship beer on site is called Walk Off Lager. We made it just for the park. It's the number one selling beer at the park. It's a crushable 4.2%, 100-calorie lager. It's amazing, and it gets pounded. And so we took that beer, we made it in the pilot system, and then we have a bat manufacturer right next to us in Verona, Wisconsin, at our home base, no pun intended. And we took a dozen maple baseball bats from a company called Dingbat, which makes custom bats, untreated, unfinished, unused. So we get asked that too. We put them in the kettle during boiling. Then we took those out, put them in the ovens at the ballpark. They have a catering service there. We toasted these bats. Then we stuck them in the fermenter while it was fermenting for that month. And we called that beer Walk Off Dinger. And we sold it on opening day. And we took 2 of those kegs back to our brewery in Verona, and they sold out. I took them there 2 weeks ago. They're gone. And so just doing cool shit to keep our top of mind and fun stuff. And there was a hint of wood in there. It actually worked. So it was like walk-off lager, fantastic tasting, but with this hint of wood, like there's a little bit of a toothpick in there kind of flavor. In a couple of weeks, they're having a Margaritaville weekend. And so we got a lime, coriander, salt goza that's going to be ready. That'll be that German sour style, tastes like a margarita. We'll be selling that during there. So we did a Pink Boot Society event inside the brewery. The brewery was full on a Saturday of opening weekend, game day, Mother's Day weekend, with I think it was like 15 Wisconsin chapter Pink Boots Society members in there brewing a key lime and raspberry sour that we're going to unveil later in the year. So all kinds of innovation, all kinds of cool stuff, and stuff that we can make news with, get it out into the market and community, and kind of get into our social channels. We've had several TV news stations cover what we're doing there. So that thing, doing really interesting thing that catches people attention, the news crews will show up and you'll get your story out even more. So it's been quite an amazing tool for us.
No, it's definitely a fun project to be involved with. So looking at your love of baseball and beer, if you could have the perfect beer branded baseball name beer, I should say. What do you want to call that beer, Paul? Do you have something you're just waiting to pull out?
Oh man, I'm pretty fond of walk off and then walk off dinger, like the extension. Those are good. I'm from the California Bay Area, and I've always been an Oakland A's fan, so maybe it should be called "When Will the A's Be Good Again?" If you're not following baseball, they are. They are literally on track to be the worst team in the history of baseball, and it's pretty sad. And ironically, one of the owners of the Lake Country Dockhounds is a friend of mine named Sonny Bando, who is the son of a former all-star third baseman for the Oakland A's. So he and I talk about the Oakland A's a lot. So there's so many great names. How about Wild Pitch? Maybe some Wild Yeast or something going on.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah. So you can spend all day on this topic.
Yeah, it opens fun doors just to find ways to connect the two topics, the beer and baseball.
You can do a brush back of some sort. You could do a frozen rope.
I'll be on the lookout for some of these coming out of the stadium.
Yeah, I like that. Now I got some ideas.
Yeah. Now, the guy dived into a completely different topic. Recently we've seen several craft brands that were part of big beer craft divisions. They were bought back by ownership. A couple have had this happen recently. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you're going to see happen? We're going to see happen more?
That was I saw that and I was like, whoa, that's interesting.
2 in a week.
Yeah, both Constellation, right? I think
it was Appalachian Mountain and Funky Buddha.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, I think actually might be 3 then, because I think Constellation offloaded 2 of theirs to their original owners. That's very, very interesting. And in fact, the way Molson Coors, the way we kind of acquired craft brands into the company were to keep the original owners involved. Some of them really that's kind of come and gone, but those kind of maintain relationships. So, never was that relationship maintained to find a potential future buyer. So it was a bit surprising to me, but at the same time, I know that the challenges that craft breweries have had. I know that it's easier said than done when a large company acquires a small company. It is a extremely difficult challenge to give those small brands the time and attention and the nurturing and the prioritization in the large companies. And so even in the case of Molson Coors, you had a couple that really hit and a couple that didn't. And so I guess while I am surprised I heard that news, when I really sit back and think about it, I'm not that surprised, because you get these original owners who are still passionate about the brands that they sold. They saw an opportunity, they took it, they sold them, but they probably sat there and saw that what was happening wasn't what they had in mind. And so they were able to get them back. And I'm not surprised by that when I sit back and think about it, because for every successful integration of a craft brand into a large company, there's probably been more that weren't as successful as they hoped.
Yeah, that's really, really good insight there, Paul. Now, just looking at beer as a whole, I mean, 6.5 years ago, we were only at 5,000 breweries. Now we're, only at almost 10,000 breweries out there. Times are changing quite a bit. We're not really going to dive into, predictions for the next few years, but looking at everywhere you've been, everywhere you've worked, are there any beer cities that have impressed you over your career in beer? Maybe off the radar places that you've had the opportunity to travel to that you just felt something special there, whether it was just a cluster of breweries that had a really strong community. You can definitely shout out Milwaukee, because I'm excited to be there in just a few weeks, where that history is going to radiate.
I read something about Milwaukee that I thought was super interesting a couple of years ago, that there were the same number of breweries in Wisconsin, like in 2019, as there were in like 1890. Like, because all that incoming brewing passion came in the 1800s after Miller, after Schlitz, all those big brands, and it kind of spurned an entire kind of industry of what would have been craft beer at the time, right? And then consolidation happened over the next 100 years, and then it took another 25 for that number to emerge again. So yeah, Wisconsin's got it going on again, big time. All parts of it. Actually, there's a lot of really cool breweries right in this area that I'm very fond of. Unfortunately, I think the rest of my list will be places that are probably not that surprising, because they're places I visited while I was with 10th and Blake. So I know that it's not, I wouldn't surprise anyone if I said that in Oregon there's still a great vibe. In fact, we used to talk about Oregon as like second generation craft. So you had the OG craft monsters out there that are still big and successful, and then you had the second generation, which were like Hot Valley and 10 Barrel and places like that. And then those had a huge growth spurt, and one of the bigger ones kind of were a little bit more stagnant. So it's interesting, like craft cities in the states that have been around for a long time have seen like a second generation of craft breweries come into them, and I find that interesting. Athens was where Terrapin sat was always one of my favorite places to visit, and there's other brands down there, and they all get along pretty well, and I think they've created a nice vibe. It's those kind of cities I'm mentioning, like Eugene and Athens, and I think those are like really cool cities to be in, right size cities, college towns. So those are always places I'd love to visit. And of course, I've been to Asheville, but that's on everyone's list. So,
Well, I mean, there's still great cities to visit, of course.
yeah.
So earlier in our conversation, you mentioned Modelo and, how that brand has grown. But, looking at everything you've been involved with over the past 20 years in beer, what would you say you're most proud of, Paul?
That's a
And you've got quite a few friends in the chat today saying hello to you, and that you're a great dude.
I see. I did see someone said, tell Malcolm said hello. So I'll just say hi to Malcolm myself. He used to be with Miller Coors as a Cicerone. He was awesome. He is awesome. Hi, Malcolm. Frankly, two things come to mind, and they're a little bit encompassing and not like that specific. It's I do take great pride in the fact that I think, for the most part, the brands that I've worked on were in better shape than when I left them than when I found them. And I'm not saying they were all in bad shape. I've done some revivals. We helped revive Milwaukee's Best Light, my first job. Mickey's. We did some. The cool thing about those brands is they were under the radar of everybody, so we just did what we wanted and we got away with some stuff, and it was fantastic. For example, Mickey's was the first sponsor of the UFC when no one would touch it. And it blew the doors off. We put all the fighters on the cans, and we did stuff that no one thought of. We had a mantra that was like, the only time anyone's going to see any of our marketing is when it's on the can or on our product, because that's all people are going to see. We don't have an ad budget. Distributors aren't going to build giant displays with massive, point of sale. So that thing really unlocked the doors on a pretty cool old school brand. So those are just examples of where I feel like I was able to leave brands in a better shape. In South Africa, I inherited a portfolio of premium brands that were kind of withering on the vine, and we helped. When I left, they were growing again, and we had a team that people were excited to be a part of, which sort of leads to my second thing, which is not only am I happy about the brands that I've worked on and how I've sort of left a legacy with the teams that I worked on, but the second part is the organizations I've been part of and helped build. And so to me, it always comes back to the people that you're working with. Whether you're in a big company, small company, you got to have the right people on the team, adding value, adding to the culture, building up the business. And I am happy to say that, like, one of my legacies in the beer business is also the impact I've had on teams and companies. And I've got lifelong friends that I've met in every piece of my journey. And they were sometimes coworkers, sometimes reports of mine, sometimes just members of the team that were further downstream. I call all these people, like I said, I've never burned a bridge. So I'm really, really proud of the relationships I've made and formed and kept, actually.
That's a great way to go out, Paul. I mean, that's truly what this industry is about. We connect here, but we're here for the relationships and just the connections with other people.
And they go hand in hand. And thankfully, this industry you really can't have one without the other. So
awesome. Well, Paul, thank you for sharing so much about your, adventure in beer and prior to beer and all of your insight today. It's been a great time getting to know you. I hope we get to share a pint in Wisconsin coming up. I'm sure we'll connect.
I know someone from our team's coming down there, at least one. So maybe I'll crash the party and say hi.
Bring a few 19.2s and we'll have a good old time.
We'll have a Dank Beast party. How's that?
Oh boy, I don't know if I'm ready for that.
Okay.
Well, Paul, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Andrew, thanks for having me. Thanks.
Cheers.